We were talking about some fun things last time. Um, my favorite thing that we talked about was the Studio Ghibli films.
Yeah, man.
So what?
Let's start with that.
Dude, let's start. What were what were some of your favorites that like you had ever watched? How did you end up finding those films?
Yeah. It's just from a friend that I went to school with. He was like a evangelist for his films, basically. Um, and he was just like, you gotta go down the list and watch all of them. And it was really worth my time to do that. Yeah.
When did that happen? Like, were you still in high school or were you in
I was.
college?
I was in high school.
High school.
Yep. So yeah, we enjoyed those in high school. I mean, I feel like I don't remember really the order. I mean, I probably saw like Castle in the Sky first,
Hmm.
and then you get into like the weeds of the less popular ones. Yeah.
Dude, yeah.
How about you?
I I think the first one that I saw, I think I was also in high school. Am I um no. No, okay, no, I remember. I remember what it was. So when I was in middle school, I think around 8th grade, I remember not being allowed to stay up super late. And I was watching Naruto when it's like still on Cartoon Network on Toonami or whatever. And then I think like this is like when Toonami still had like stuff that kids maybe shouldn't have watched. And I remember
You
Princess
knew you were
Mononoke.
like cool with the G when you were
Yes.
watching Toonami. Say no SpongeBob.
Oh, no, I felt like an adult.
Yeah.
But I remember Princess Mononoke came up, and if you've ever watched that film, it is like very brutal in a lot of scenes. And I remember being like, "Oh, I'm gonna stay up and watch this film. This looks good." And watching it, I remember being like terrified at like all the creatures, like the way that the creatures would look. I remember I had nightmares about there's this one scene where this guy gets like super strong, and so he like fires his arrow, and it blows off another guy, like his arm. So like the arrow goes through his arm, but doesn't just get like stuck in there, like it just severs his arm.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was just stunned as a little 13-year-old, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember having nightmares about that movie. And then upon revisiting it in college, I was like, this is an amazing film. And but I watched that, and then the other like very memorable one that I know of is Howl's Moving Castle, and that's because my cousin and I were both really into like anime at the time, and then when we found like anime movies, this was like a really magical one, I guess. Because like I really like adventure stories, and her like growing up, she was really into like the romance like animes and that kind of stuff. Like, and I think that movie had a really good blend of both, where it was like it's like a romance film in a way, but in this like wild situation enough to where it like isn't just like a lovey-dovey movie the whole way through. If
Yeah,
that makes
he's
any
he's such a
sense.
master at blending lots of different like emotions and elements without getting like too extreme, I guess. Like he'll have touches of violence, touches of romance, touches of everything.
Yeah.
So I even in my most like scared moments as a younger person watching them, it was never like too crazy. Especially because I don't have much of an affinity for horror film, like scary movies. Yeah, it's so like it's a style that's so ubiquitous. I find that like so many kinds of people can enjoy it. Like there's kind of something in them for everyone. They're
Hmm.
just so brilliant. Yeah.
No, I definitely love them. I remember in college, we were doing like a film studies class, like one of the first ones, like when you sign up for the major that you have to do. I remember one of the last ones was Spirited Away. because like a big element of that film is like this like critique on like, or like I guess in partnership with like things that deal with environmentalism. So um like the spirit of the water not being able to turn into like a dragon because like his true form, because the place that he's from is dirty, or or like there's this one like creature that like steals a bunch of stuff and he gets like into these magical bathtubs and then he's like clean and fresh all of a sudden. Um and like just like these big critiques, I guess, on greed and like what that can lead to and like that kind of stuff. Um and then that movie's wild just because of like the situation that like the kid is in terms of like mom, dad, and a kid like accidentally walk into this place where like the parents are transformed into pigs, and then the kid is like left all by herself in like this spirit world, and you're like, wow, that is wild. And then the characters are just so much fun, like the guy who's in the boiler room and like the assistant of like the place, and it's it's just a lot of fun, and I think that's one of my favorite parts of those movies is just like they're always a lot of fun. Um, and like the worlds that he builds are really really captivating. Like they're all fantasy, but it feels like I guess enough of like he's blending different things, whether it's like Japanese culture and European culture enough to where it feels like it's totally its own thing. And like it's just wild. It's just so much fun to like to just like I guess embrace being in those worlds.
Totally. I think when I like kind of got it with his films, like you get like, you know, his body of work as a whole. Like you see One Piece and you can't really know like what he's about with just one singular film. And I remember watching Nausicaa. And then that one I knew I was like, okay, I understand what this guy's about. I think it was maybe like the third one I watched or something like that. But
Was there a thing inside of that movie that like made you realize that, or just like movie as a whole as you completed it?
well, it wasn't as like it's not as like dense as like a Howls or even a Spirited Away, which I would describe as kind of like they're like these dense stories with lots of characters and like different just like this rainbow of emotions, this gradient of stuff. And Nausicaa is very much like this solitary like man versus nature kind of thing. So it's just like a different approach, and it just I feel like it was him kind of like trying to be grittier. It's not like this I don't know, like as feel good Disney type of thing. Not that, yeah, but yeah, I think that one, just seeing him try something really different, I was like, okay, you can see what kind of storyteller this guy is.
I like when you watch the film, you see like kids deal with like heavy stuff a lot of the times.
Oh
Like
man,
it's not just like heavy stuff is for adults. Does that make sense? Or like stuff that's weighty, whether it's like, oh my parents died or oh I'm lost and like a bunch of different things like that. It's like it's just those things, but a kid dealing with it, not like a, famous actor in their 20s.
right? Yeah,
And yeah, I just really appreciated that. I like when movies do that when they like it feels like they're not treating the viewer like they're dumb. I think having a lot of movies like that is really refreshing. Not that saying like, dumb movies that like the whole purpose is for the audience to just like sit back and turn your brain off are bad, but like sometimes it's nice to have like a weighty movie that like whether it's a kid watching it um, or an adult watching it, it doesn't treat you like you're stupid. And I
sure.
think that comes through in a lot of those movies.
Something really fun about animation, I think, is like there's kind of a different like. I find that the stories do tend to kind of like expand a lot. You know, you're talking about like really crazier plots because I feel like a huge fascination with making movies in the real world is simply pulling them off. You write these characters and you got to find a person that in the real world that needs to look like them and have a performance that sounds like them. And that's kind of like amazing. It's like really hard to do all the things that you need places, the real clothes. So that's like the effort. Not to say the stories are weaker for that, but in animation, like you're not really worried about the performance or really anything. So it's like purely like more of an experiment in like just crazy storytelling. So I think that's why animation can kind of get away with like weirder stuff. And obviously it's not like bound to reality. Like you can have more fantastical things happen.
Well, yeah, I think that aspect of it, just with like locations, what's wonderful about that and like animation is like you just like make it up. You're like, oh, we need to be in space. Like, we'll just draw that we're in space, you know? Oh, we need this like cool farmhouse in the cornfield. It's like, we don't need to find that necessarily and get permission to like film in it for like a whole month or whatever. It's just like, you might find like inspo from something real, right?
Right.
But aside from that, you're just like whipping it up.
For sure.
And I think that's like a wonderful thing about animation is it like it leads to like more imaginative stuff because I think it allows for that by not having to deal with things like permission or like, you know, payment fees for a place that you go to or whatever.
Like it's like not as, I don't know. I feel like real films are just a huge like logistical task, if anything.
Well, I think the logistics are probably different because I'm sure there's like I've never made an animated film before, but I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that's like people are either really upset about in terms of like a process of like how you get things done or
sure
things like that. But like like coming from our world, I think it's probably more appealing in a way because you're not dealing with stuff that we don't like to do in the first place. You're just dealing with other stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine. It'd be cool to kind of like oversee or I don't know, even like you should have somebody on this podcast if you know anyone that does animation because that's super cool.
I've always been curious about the process of directing animation because because the drawing I get, right? Where it's like we're just drawing. Like the screenwriting for animation is basically almost the same thing, I would assume, other than maybe like typing out some like actions that you can have things do that, you know, can't happen in real life or whatever. But drawing I get, right? Because you're just like sitting down and you're just drawing it, or you're sitting down and like animating it in 3D and all that kind of stuff. And so I understand that aspect. And but like the directing side of animation where you're like, how involved is like a director in an animated film in the capacity of like when do they check in? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Because I feel like on set, like a director's like always there and like talking and making decisions. And I'm sure they're doing that in an animated film too. But like how often are they sitting at like a table with one of the artists, you know, like drawing frames?
Seriously.
Or do they like only check in like after a week? And I'd be curious about how many directors are like how often you get to change things that like the artists are making.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like you take like 2 weeks, you draw like a whole scene. And aside from like maybe how that scene plays out or like how expressive a character is being, like that makes sense. Like, oh, they're not being sad enough. This moment's supposed to be way sadder. But like
in that way, there is a lot of similarities where they're like, you know, first and foremost, like they're definitely going to be there for the lines because you record the dialogue.
100%.
You would probably record the dialogue first. You probably have some like
so.
storyboards, but And then I would imagine I'm kind of imagining a process that's probably like basically a storyboard and then getting higher resolution with just more in between frames. So if something isn't stacking up, you've only drawn like the equivalent of maybe 3 frames in a
Yeah.
second, or maybe even just so it'll kind of gradually get into more motion.
Yeah. I'm just wondering
don't
about
know.
like, I'm curious about like the technical aspects of it. So like, how often
Yeah.
are they just like doing check-ins and being like, this is
Seriously, you basically
you
have
know.
like a team it has to be, there'd have to be some sort of like common reference. What,
Because I'm sure,
lots of meetings.
that's, oh yeah, because like you gotta imagine like, because the people who are painting backgrounds aren't the people who are drawing the characters. The people who are coloring those characters aren't usually the same people drawing those characters. Like, and so like the amount of pass offs that I feel like animation has, like I'm just curious like where the director, aside from like directory things where it's like talent, they're not expressive enough, like this is wrong in the scene, like how often are they checking in with artists based on like what's planned ahead of time. um that's one thing I've always been curious about. But I mean the fact that people pull off like animated films in general, because like you hear how long certain films take, they're like, oh, this film took a year to make because it was like 3 months of shooting and then like 9 months of post-production, and that's for like an indie feature or whatever. And then animated films, they're like, yeah, we've been working on this animated film for 6 years, and you're
I
like,
cannot
oh
even.
my god.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, how many people like came into that, how many people stopped working on it, how many people like
Like,
I think what you said at the beginning, like it's probably a lot of meetings, is probably like really really true.
like it would I just imagine like basically an entire floor of a building of just people on computers
Mhm.
just chopping away at
Just
it.
cranking away at it. And then
I
like,
mean,
because like I guess with all that, just because you can like just make whatever you want, there's probably like so much of that time is just planning on what you're gonna make,
yeah.
rather than letting anybody just like willy nilly like draw whatever they want.
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's talk about your music video, your big one that you just did. I know Keegan, our the other podcast host, Keegan was on your music video.
Yeah.
Came from LA. He said it was pretty tight. So, what was that like? Was it solid? Was it fun? Was it
Yeah, it
do
was
you
cool.
feel creatively fulfilled?
I do. Yeah, it is a super special project. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think where to start. So the artists, one of them I had worked with probably like 3 or 4 times on different people's projects, and then he like referred me to the management of this new project he was being a part of as well, which was like a duo thing. And they basically just wanted to do it in a candy store, like a candy shop. So we, thanks to Keegan, found one right in Mechanicsburg that's like super preserved. It was not it's not exactly a candy store, so we kind of transformed it into one. And so I was like, I basically like put them up here. They came from New York to come, and yeah, we basically spent the day before set dressing, and we got probably like maybe, I don't know, maybe just a ton of candy, like maybe it was maybe like $600 of candy or something to just kind of like fill the shelves and stuff like that. But yeah, it was like there were a couple things that were new. They wanted to do like a skit, so we cast it. I don't often like cast for music videos, but this one kind of like had the capacity to do so, and it was like what their idea was.
Yeah.
So
So what? Wait,
Yeah.
was it the musicians? They didn't themselves like want to be in it, or like they also wanted to have talent be characters.
Yeah, the second one,
Okay.
I think. Yeah, because they're in it, but they were just other characters that were made sense for what happened. So we needed like a candy shop guy, like your like pinstripe shirt guy, right? A huge like basically I was really studying like the Willy Wonka candy shop scene that we lifted like a ton from that actually. That was like the primo inspiration, like deep wood, like not your like rainbow poppy candy shop, but more of like a I don't know, more old
Like
school.
apothecary that sells like
Yes.
sugary sweets
Yes. Sugary sweets.
instead of medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean basically one thing that we were thinking about because their only prompt coming into it was like, well, we want it in a candy shop, and that was kind of it. And then I kind of like to come up with like prompts for people to like work off of and see what people like. So I was like, okay, well maybe there's some sort of like ulterior business happening or something that yeah, something that like somebody's trying to like stay low key about. Like there were a couple prompts that I like pitched where it was like, oh, maybe like the extras are like insanely weird and we get like, you know, like a greased up bodybuilder that comes in, like kind of like a slice of society, construction worker comes in, does some, you know, whatever. They didn't like that. They wanted to do more of this like almost there's something happening here that shouldn't be like criminal almost. So the only other character we needed to cast was this like they originally wanted to be like a food critic, but it kind of shifted to being like like an inspector. So basically, the shop is getting inspected, and we made a fictional candy bar that like is kind of like a play off of the artist's name, and it turns out that she's like trying to bust the place for carrying them, and then the shop owner's kind of like trying to like keep them away, and then like the artists and the extras are kind of like helping them keep this kind of like cat and mouse thing. So that's kind of like where it ended up, but yeah.
Dude, that's super fun. I know well, after that music video ended, Keegan was telling me about his mom doing like set decoration, and like
Yeah.
then I remember when you and I were talking after, like her being really talented, I guess, like
Yeah.
out of nowhere for this.
Yeah. Uh, Susan Hurley, you got to hire her as your production designer. She is a sleeper. But yeah, she basically had a long career in like theater and dance and really wanted to like she's done some stuff like that and is just like looking to like break into it essentially. She did an amazing job. Like it I just like would not have been the same without her in there. So she was like sourcing all kinds of crazy stuff. She got like all of our props. A lot of like candy that I didn't like. I thought I knew how much I needed, and then she was like, "No, you need like way more." But yeah, it was awesome. She's amazing.
Yeah. Was that aspect of like the production, like having somebody focus on something like that? Because like I know with some of the small stuff that I do, like it's just like me, like the only crew that I have is like, okay, I have like a grip, a PA, and maybe like a camera operator, right?
Yeah.
But like that kind of thing, it seems like so specific. Like, were you surprised by anything? Like aside from the amount of candy that she brought, like were you surprised by anything? You're like, oh, I didn't realize that, or like that's a great idea, or this was worth it because of XYZ or whatever.
Yeah, well, so I think at first you said challenges, and that kind of that comes to mind where, yeah, just you being like this kind of central information system for all of like these individual departments that don't know. So like how what each department doing relates, but they don't. So you're like talking to the production designer about things that you're thinking about that they can't possibly know, like how you're going to shoot this this sort of thing. And, you know, they're just trying to like, be like, when everyone's coming to you, they're basically just like, what do you want? Or like, what is it that you're imagining for this? And I'm trying to think of your question after that. You were saying
Was
challenges.
there just like anything surprising, like with hiring somebody to do something like I guess so specific on set, where like and her being really talented at that, like was there anything surprising that she brought to like the table aside from like the amount of candy that you didn't realize you needed to buy?
Um, yeah, I think she was just very meticulous, which is a great thing, and also more of a production designer than I am. So like if I can communicate to her like what I'm looking for, and if I'm somebody that she can like bounce choices off of, she's like taking it just to an entirely new level. Um, like I think maybe the time was something I was not expecting, because she would be like hypercritical about like we would do one shelf at a time, like totally redo it, and you know, seeing like our body of candies that we had and like getting them up there, and she would be like, you know, does this jar need to like swap diagonally here, and does that look better as like when you step back a little bit? And I think I was like perhaps a little less precious about it, but you know, she is, and she's, you know, kind of exploring these options with me, and like it was great. I mean, it made for a way better uh, end product. But yeah, I mean, wow, because usually exactly like usually you aren't like maybe you're doing that stuff yourself sometimes.
Yeah, dude, no, definitely.
Or like nobody cares, so it'll be as good as like you care for it to be. So
Yeah, because like with a lot of your music video stuff, like at least from like the past couple years, it's been pretty like solo, right? Aside from maybe like a production assistant or something.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it varies. Like sometimes, a lot of times, it's just like, am I? Well, obviously, budget is like the first thing, and then the second thing is like, am I pumped on this? um, but yeah, over the last year, it's varied between like, yeah, stuff that I can crew up, stuff that I'm still doing pretty lean, and then sometimes like I'm crewing, like I'll DP other people's stuff, and some of those have been relatively big scope wise. So that's pretty much the three categories.
Yeah. Do you like making your own stuff more? Or do you like doing the more like hyper or specific role of like just shooting the videos? Like where do you? Because I know I love doing a lot of things, but I clearly have a preference to like stuff that I'm doing, even if that doesn't mean that I don't want to not do the other stuff. But I'm just curious if you have any like thoughts on that.
I think it's all. I think it's all when it comes to crewing. I think it just all comes down to like who you're working with and the expectations in advance. Like, for instance, if you're a director and you're not, and like I'm just speaking from experience. Like, if I'm a DP but I'm feeling completely in the dark, that's not fun. Like, that's just like hard. But yeah, that's kind of where the collaborators, the right collaborators, play into it, because it's like, oh well, then you know, maybe you're gonna jump on these projects with some new people. Maybe you're gonna like not be as like central to like their, you know, day in and day out relationship or whatever. So yeah, and you also set the pace in a lot of ways. If you're like a DP and you're like, look, I need this stuff. We're going to have these calls. We're going to factor that into our budgets. We're going to prep a certain way. So a lot of it is, yeah, set by you, and people might not necessarily be like, that might not be in their process inherently. I would say I have maybe a slight preference to doing my own stuff. Just because like it's uncomfortable crewing for like either weird or disappointing. I guess that's what it is. When I feel like when you're crewing, you're a little more susceptible to like disappointment because you're not like structuring it yourself. But I understand that not everybody really cares. So.
I understand that. Yeah. I mean, well, dude, it's like pretty magical to see what you can turn stuff into. I remember like Grip PAing on like a dance music video that we did, where like a lot of like I was mostly just running around with like a bounce board shooting light into people.
Yeah.
And I remember like being on like because I was never behind camera to see like frames that you were getting, but I remember seeing that and being like, whoa, when you first sent it to me and like texted it back, and I was like, that's tough. I was like, that was cool. And I just love video because of that moment of like filming something and like not being sure, or like having somebody film, like you're a part of something where you like, you don't get it, you're not involved in the whole part of it. So whether you're just filling a role on set or like you're a director and like, you know, and you're not like involved with like you're watching people rig stuff up for you, but like you don't exactly have that like mindset, and then watching the results at the very end is like really wonderful. And I think a lot of your projects have that effect on like whether it's behind the scenes stuff that I've seen or like ones that I've worked on. It's really cool to like watch them flower. I guess is the best way to say it.
That's true. That is something pretty special about, kind of being in more of a crew position, is kind of being walloped at the end of just like, whoa, like you could not have really known that what it was going to be and seeing it. So it's really cool. And also thank you, man.
Dude,
that was
you're
a cool
welcome.
video. Thank you for bouncing for me that day.
Dude, yes. I was just a quacker clamp for like 10 hours. It was great. A moving quacker clamp.
Yeah.
But dude, that was also one of the first like videos where like bouncing like a harder light into people I was like not a fan of in general. And so the entire day when you're like, can you just bounce the sun on like silver and point it right at him? I was like, this isn't gonna look cool. And then you sent it to me and I was just like, oh damn, Josh knows what he's talking about. Because I was just like, I just remember being like at that point I was like, you know, really obsessed with like soft light. And like this was like one of the projects where you're just like, just freaking laser that silver side right into their face. I was just like, oh dude, and the like, I guess just a really practical example of this is like sometimes the way things look like in real life when you like, okay, when you're like on set and somebody lights something really well, or like you're watching like a gaffer do their thing, sometimes you look at it and you're like, that can't possibly look good. And then you look on frame and you're like, that looks really good on camera. Like,
yeah.
And I don't know if it's just like the way your brain sort of interprets light, and the way the camera does it is just different enough to where it's like good or bad, or, you know, whichever way it leans. But I remember at one of those moments being like blown away at like the result versus like what I thought of in real life.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel like that.
And now I really like, you know, throwing like a silver side into somebody. It's really fun.
Totally. That definitely has its uses. I feel, but that's so profound though. Like I feel like I would see like in like BTS videos where maybe it's with a phone or maybe it's with like some CD or camera, and you're seeing kind of like this off-axis shot, and you're just like, this lighting looks, there's no way this could look good. And then you see the frame and it's just so critical, like the shot, lighting for the shot with the particular camera. So yeah, filmmaking is so easy to get wrong.
Well, and dude, I guess that's why like when you're at venues and stuff, like, you know, filming for weddings or whatever, where it's like, this is a wonderfully lit space, like for a human to just exist in. And then you whip out your camera and you're like, ugh, like this is so gross. But then you put like nice little spotlight on him so your camera can see him in like the reception. And you're like, wow, this looks great. And then everyone's like,
everyone
it's
hates
too
it.
bright. Like, why? can you turn it off? Like, and you're like, and so it's just so fun to see those like moments and try to learn from them of like how you either balance that, right? You know, if it's like an event style video where it's like the real life matters, or like if it's total fiction or a music video or a narrative where it's like you're just lighting for what the camera can see. And like if in real life it doesn't look that hot, it's like as long as the camera is like getting it right.
Yeah. I
That's
often
awesome.
feel like I guess you'd call it like I always get like concerned sometimes when I have to like explain to anyone like on client side about lighting, because I feel like they don't they can't possibly know what it means, and I just sound like I'm just sounding like an idiot when I'm like, oh, but like we need, wait a minute, we need to like fiddle with the lighting for 5 minutes. I just feel like that just like glazes right over clients.
They're just like, what
So I,
what would this what would this possibly change?
right, like I just can't imagine. I just can't. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
on the schedule.
Hey man, as long as
You
you
never
put
have
it
to
in
ask
there.
for time to light. But yeah, I always feel kind of silly and talking anything about lighting with a client. It's funny.
Just because like of like the foreign aspect to them, you mean?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just in my own mental construction, I'm thinking it's silly, but
Yeah.
they
So
probably
much
don't. They're
fun.
probably like whatever.
No, I love it. I love it. Josh,
Funny.
I think that's our time. I think that was a half hour. I'm trying to keep it tight. Trying to keep this podcast tight. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate you.
Thank you for talking about animation
Yeah.
and lighting and many other awesome things.
Yeah.
Cool. Goodbye. Goodbye.